Chicago, 1893. World's Fair fever gripped the city. 27 million visitors would flood in over 6 months, more than the entire population of the United States at that time. Hotels overflowed. Boarding houses turned families away nightly. Into this chaos stepped a man who called himself Henry Howard Holmes. But that wasn't his real name. Born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, he'd reinvented himself multiple times before arriving in Chicago. Medical school dropout turned con artist. Husband to 3 women simultaneously, none aware of the others. A man whose charm masked something far darker. Holmes spotted opportunity in Chicago's desperate housing shortage. He purchased a vacant lot at 63rd and Wallace, right in Englewood, prime territory for fair visitors. What he built there would later be called the Murder Castle. But in 1891, it just looked like an ordinary 3-story building with a pharmacy on the ground floor. The construction itself raised questions nobody asked loudly enough. Holmes hired workers in small crews, firing each group before they finished their sections. Different contractors for different floors, laborers who never saw the complete blueprint. When they demanded payment, he'd call them incompetent and refuse. Then he'd hire new workers who knew nothing about what came before. The building inspector should have stopped everything. Staircases that led nowhere, doors opening onto brick walls, a second-floor room with no windows and a gas line controlled from Holmes's bedroom. But Chicago was drowning in construction permits, thousands of buildings going up for the fair. One eccentric layout got lost in the shuffle. By 1892, Holmes's World's Fair Hotel stood complete. Ground floor, pharmacy and retail shops facing the street. Normal, profitable. Above that, a labyrinth only Holmes understood. The second floor contained guest rooms, or what appeared to be guest rooms. Some had peepholes drilled through walls. Others featured trapdoors hidden beneath rugs. Gas jets lined several rooms, their controls running through the walls to Holmes's private quarters. One chamber had been soundproofed, its walls lined with asbestos. Another room locked only from the outside. Guests checked in through the pharmacy, young women mostly, traveling alone to see the fair, far from family, excited about the modern city. Holmes worked the counter himself, friendly and professional. He'd mentioned he had rooms available upstairs, clean, affordable, safe. Nobody saw the chute he'd installed, a greased slide connecting upper floors directly to the basement. Minnie Williams arrived in 1893, 24 years old. From Mississippi, she'd inherited property in Fort Worth, Texas, valuable land her parents left her. Holmes had been corresponding with her for months, love letters written under yet another false name. When she stepped off the train in Chicago, he was waiting. She moved into the hotel, took a job helping manage his pharmacy. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Holmes told her about his divorce, a complete fabrication. He said his wife had taken everything. Minnie felt sorry for him. She trusted him. Her sister Anna came to visit that summer, younger by 2 years. The sisters shared a room on the second floor. They attended the fair together, marveling at the Ferris wheel, the electric lights, the exotic exhibits from around the world. Holmes played the gracious host. Anna disappeared first, July 18, 1893. Holmes told Minnie that Anna had received urgent news. Their uncle in Texas was dying. Anna had to leave immediately, couldn't even say goodbye. Minnie found it strange. Her sister would have woken her. But Holmes had the telegram, official Western Union paper. She believed him. Minnie followed on Christmas Eve that same year. By then, Holmes had convinced her to sign over her Fort Worth property. A business investment, he explained. They were partners now. She signed the papers in his office, that windowless second-floor room. The door locked behind her. Nobody reported either sister missing for months. Their family in Mississippi assumed they were still in Chicago. Holmes had Minnie's signature. He could forge letters. He did. The basement of Holmes's building contained a furnace large enough to cremate human remains, a stretching table, the kind found in medical schools for dissection, tanks of corrosive acid, surgical instruments hung on the walls, meticulously organized. Holmes had studied medicine, never finished his degree, but he knew anatomy. He knew which bones sold well to medical schools desperate for teaching specimens. A complete skeleton could fetch $200, half a year's wages for a factory worker. The World's Fair closed in October 1893. Visitors left Chicago. The hotel emptied. Holmes's cash flow dried up. He owed money to dozens of creditors, had juggled loans and cons across multiple cities under multiple names. He left Chicago in 1894, one step ahead of investigators closing in on his insurance frauds. The hotel stood empty. Neighbors complained about strange smells coming from the basement. Nothing was done. Holmes ran. Fort Worth first, trying to claim Minnie Williams's property, but the paperwork raised suspicions. A lawyer there contacted authorities in Chicago, then Philadelphia, where Holmes attempted his most ambitious con yet, a life insurance scheme involving a man named Benjamin Pitezel. Pitezel was Holmes's accomplice, 40-something, married with 5 children, desperate for money. The plan seemed simple: fake Pitezel's death, collect $10,000 in insurance, split the proceeds. Holmes had done this before, sort of. He'd burned bodies, claimed they were someone else, collected money, always stayed one town ahead of questions. But September 1894 in Philadelphia didn't go according to plan. Pitezel's body turned up in a rented shop on Callowhill Street, badly burned, identified through dental records. Insurance investigators grew suspicious immediately. The burn patterns didn't match the supposed accident. They brought in the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Here's where Holmes made his critical mistake. He'd actually killed Pitezel. No faking this time. The insurance fraud was real, but so was the murder. He convinced Pitezel's widow Carrie that her husband was alive, hiding part of the plan. He'd take her to him soon. First, though, she needed to let him travel with 3 of her children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard. Protection, he said. Pitezel would want them safe. Carrie Pitezel trusted him. He'd been her husband's business partner for years. Detective Frank Geyer picked up the trail in July 1895. Holmes was already in custody for insurance fraud, but Geyer suspected more. 3 Pitezel children were missing. Holmes claimed he'd left them with a widow named Minnie Williams in London, but Geyer had traced Holmes's movements. The man had never left North America. Geyer started in Detroit, hotels, boarding houses. He carried photographs of the children. Did anyone remember a man traveling with 3 kids last October? A tall man, mustache, very charming. He found the first lead in Cincinnati. A landlady remembered Holmes, remembered 2 of the girls, Alice and Nellie, 8 and 11 years old. They'd stayed only a few days. Seemed frightened. The man said they were going to meet their father. Toronto came next. October 1894. Geyer found a house Holmes had rented on St. Vincent Street. Short-term, paid cash. The landlord remembered because the man had asked strange questions about the basement. Was it private? Did anyone else have access? Geyer got a warrant. They dug up the basement floor. They found Alice and Nellie, buried shallow, badly decomposed after 8 months. The coroner determined they'd been asphyxiated, probably chloroform given Holmes's medical background. Alice still wore the dress her mother had made for her. Howard Pitezel, the 5-year-old boy, was still missing. Geyer worked backward through Holmes's travel records, train tickets, hotel registries, a paper trail across 3 states, Indianapolis. He found a house on East Market Street that Holmes had rented briefly in October 1894. The chimney. They found Howard's remains stuffed inside the chimney, burned, partially cremated. The boy's teeth confirmed identification. The evidence piled up fast after that. Authorities in Chicago finally searched Holmes's hotel thoroughly. The building had been largely abandoned after he fled, but nobody had looked closely at the basement. Nobody had noticed the chute. They found bone fragments in the furnace, women's clothing hidden behind false walls, jewelry that families later identified, a dissection table with restraint straps, bottles of chloroform and other chemicals. The acid vats still contained traces of dissolved tissue. The second floor revealed its secrets under careful examination. Gas jets that could be controlled remotely, soundproofed walls, rooms that locked from outside only, peepholes drilled at eye level, the greased chute leading down. Investigators estimated at least 9 confirmed victims, possibly 20, maybe more. The furnace had been thorough, so had the acid. Some bodies were never identified, just bone fragments and scraps of clothing that matched missing person reports from 1892 and 1893. Holmes's trial began in Philadelphia in October 1895, just for the Pitezel murders. Pennsylvania wanted him for killing Benjamin Pitezel and his 3 children. That was enough. The Chicago murders would wait. The prosecution laid out a methodical case, travel records, testimony from landlords, the detective work that found the children's bodies, evidence of insurance fraud that spiraled into mass murder. Holmes defended himself initially, convinced his charm would sway the jury. It didn't. His story changed daily. First Pitezel killed himself accidentally, then Pitezel was alive in South America, then someone else killed Pitezel and framed Holmes. The children? He'd left them with Minnie Williams. No, actually with a woman in London. Wait, they'd gone to stay with relatives. His lies tangled into knots. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, first-degree murder. Sentencing came November 2, 1895. Judge Michael Arnold showed no mercy. Death by hanging, to be carried out at Moyamensing Prison, April 26, 1896. Moyamensing Prison, Philadelphia. The grey stone walls loomed cold under a steady morning drizzle. Reporters camped outside for hours, notebooks ready, eager for one last confession from America's first so-called serial killer. Inside, Herman Webster Mudgett, better known to the public as H.H. Holmes sat calmly, impeccably dressed, tie straight, shoes polished, like a man attending a social luncheon rather than his own execution. Holmes never admitted to fear. If anything, he seemed fascinated by the attention. 2 days earlier, he had dictated a 40-page confession to a journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer. In it, he claimed to have killed 27 people, though investigators quickly discovered several of those named were still alive. Yet sprinkled among obvious fabrications were details only the killer could know. Holmes described specific chambers inside his Chicago building, a vault that could be sealed airtight, a trapdoor leading to a secret hallway, gas jets hidden within walls. The confession read more like a grotesque boast than remorse. When asked why he did it, Holmes answered with unsettling calm, "I was born with the devil in me." At 10 minutes past 10 in the morning, guards led him into the prison yard. Dozens of witnesses stood behind a wooden rail. Holmes stepped onto the gallows, nodded politely to the warden, and made his final statement. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have nothing more to say." The trapdoor dropped. Instantly, his body jerked downward, but the rope failed to break his neck. Holmes dangled, struggling for over 15 minutes. Witnesses described it as a slow, silent death, his face unchanging, almost serene. He was pronounced dead at 10:35. As per his own written request, Holmes's coffin was filled with cement, completely encasing his body before burial. He feared grave robbers might dissect him, as he had done to others. Even in death, control mattered to him. While the world moved on, Chicago could not forget the hotel at 63rd and Wallace. Fire gutted parts of the building in August 1895, likely arson. Neighbors reported seeing smoke pouring from upper windows late one night. Firefighters managed to save the first floor, but the interior was ruined. After years of legal disputes and macabre fascination from tourists, the structure was finally demolished in 1938. The lot afterward sat empty for decades. Locals said no business ever stayed long there. Eventually, a post office was built on the site in the 1930s, still standing today. Employees sometimes mentioned strange feelings in the basement, an unease rather than anything supernatural. Just knowledge of what lay beneath. Holmes's crimes left deep marks beyond Chicago. The case helped shape early practices in forensic investigation and psychology. Detectives had learned the hard way that a charming, articulate man could mask monstrous intent. Pinkerton agents who once viewed fraud as a lesser offense now saw the invisible line connecting financial deceit to homicide. The Bureau of Investigation, precursor to the FBI, it later studied the case as an example of organized manipulation and interstate crime. In the public imagination, Holmes became a legend of American evil, an articulate killer at the dawn of modernity. He built not just a trap-filled structure, but a system of lies designed to exploit a country obsessed with progress. To his victims, the World's Fair represented hope and opportunity. To Holmes, it represented camouflage. Decades later, crime historians often debated whether the numbers were exaggerated. Some argued that Holmes's death count, sensationalized by newspapers, reached mythical proportions. But what remains certain is the pattern: isolation, deception, control. Each victim existed within Holmes's story only as long as he needed them. Once useful, they vanished. It is easy, perhaps comforting, to categorize him as insane, a monster outside humanity. Yet his letters suggest something colder: calculation. He wrote eloquently, quoting literature, discussing architecture and chemistry. There were no rants, no confusion, only method. When archaeologists exhumed Holmes's grave in 2018 to confirm his identity through DNA testing, they found the cement coffin perfectly intact. His body, remarkably well preserved, lay still wearing the same black suit and patent leather shoes described by witnesses in 1896. Forensic comparison confirmed what history already believed. The man hanged at Moyamensing was indeed H. Holmes, no imposter, no escapee, just a con artist whose final deceit failed him. Over a century later, the legend of H. Holmes remains intertwined with the birth of modern Chicago and America's obsession with evil hidden behind respectability. Historians often revisit his story not simply to recount horror, but to understand how he thrived in plain sight. Chicago in the 19th century was a city of promise and anonymity. Immigrants poured in monthly. Records were incomplete, police jurisdictions thin, and neighbors rarely knew each other's names. Holmes exploited that chaos expertly. Every job, every fake identity, every borrowed dollar became a rehearsal for larger crimes. The design of his hotel mirrored his personality, orderly on the outside, incoherent within. Psychologists later described it as an externalized mind, clean storefronts masking an interior maze of deception. The architecture itself testified to deliberate psychological control. Victims physically lost orientation. They depended entirely on Holmes for guidance, unaware that the building itself was his accomplice. Yet beyond the walls, Holmes's manipulations extended through documents, signatures, and charm. He convinced educated men to back imaginary inventions, loan officers to approve non-existent collateral, and women to entrust him with property deeds. Most killers rely on violence. Holmes relied on persuasion, saving violence for the end only when his lies reached expiration. In the years after his execution, crime reporting changed. Newspapers began highlighting psychological motive instead of sensational gore. Journalists no longer described only what the killer did. They asked why. Holmes's ability to appear ordinary unsettled an entire generation. Investigators studying his correspondence observed an absence of emotional tone. Even when discussing victims, he used business-like words: transaction, investment, agreement. To him, people were assets. Yet buried between lines lay traces of loneliness. He mentioned his childhood in New Hampshire, the medical school experiments, the feeling of curiosity outweighed by financial failure. It doesn't justify anything, but it makes the horror human, not supernatural. In 1937, a reporter interviewing elderly witnesses from Englewood described still remembering the smell of chemicals drifting from Holmes's basement. Another recalled the excitement of the fair turning bitter when disappearances mounted. Few spoke openly back then. Scandal carried social risk. Chicago prided itself on progress, not nightmares. When scholars revisited archived police reports decades later, they documented at least 9 verified murders through physical evidence. Others, disappearances of women who rented rooms, employees who never collected pay, remain unresolved, likely lost to the furnace or acid vats. Even without mythic inflation, those 9 lives told enough truth: ambition, deception, and vulnerability intersecting under one roof. Today, researchers examining Holmes's case use advanced behavioral analysis rather than fear. His combination of fraud and homicide mirrors patterns still seen in white-collar offenders who escalate under pressure. Deception becomes oxygen. Control replaces empathy. Holmes simply existed before a language for such disorders existed. Chicago has changed immeasurably since 1893, yet the postal workers sorting mail on 63rd Street still stand atop ground that once held secret hallways. Visitors occasionally stop outside, reading the small historical plaque. They often whisper, as though unwilling to disturb ghosts of fact rather than spirit. There are no tours, no visible remains, just knowledge residing quietly within the city's memory. When newer generations discover Holmes through documentaries or dramatizations, it is tempting to see him only as spectacle. But the true story unfolds not in the murders themselves, but in the landscape that allowed him to exist. Unchecked ambition, rapid urban growth, and the American faith that charm equals trustworthiness. Holmes weaponized that faith. He arrived when America believed science and progress could solve everything. He left proof that intellect, when hollowed of conscience, can build wonders or horrors with equal precision. The final record preserved in the National Archives labels him succinctly: Herman W. Mudgett, executed, May 7, 1996. Nothing more. Yet every time someone tells his story anew, the question returns: how many of his crimes were truly discovered, and how many remain buried beneath layers of myth and concrete? Perhaps that is the last deformation of truth Holmes achieved, forcing history to wonder forever where the deception ends.